I'm highly honored to be invited to this summit. I thank the Holy Father, Pope Francis, for conceptualizing this program, Father Sorondo for organizing the summit, and the President of the International Association of Women Judges, Honorable Justice Susanna Medina, for facilitating my attendance. I'm happy to be in Rome and at the Holy See. Nigeria is the most populous ethno-linguistically configured and religiously diverse nation in Africa. We have an estimated population of 180 million people. It is a dominant sub-regional power in Africa, a major player in the international oil market, and a strategic country within the geopolitical calculation of the world order. My paper will focus on forms of organized crimes in Nigeria, particularly human trafficking, and the legislative, executive, and judicial interventions in my country to combat these crimes, forms of organized crimes. Several forms of transnational criminal activity by organizations and individuals in Nigeria and West Africa have been recognized. The major forms include corruption and money laundering, drug trafficking, arms trafficking. There have been, in the last few months, large importations of pump rifle guns from Turkey into Nigeria, advanced fee fraud, internet fraud, including identity theft, smuggling of used cars, smuggling of prohibited and controlled goods, piracy, armed robbery, and smuggling of goods out of West Africa, particularly oil from Nigeria and precious stones, fraudulent trade practices, dumping of toxic waste on the shores of Nigeria, or even in rural areas where the rural communities do not understand the health hazards of the waste and utilize them to their peril. The effect and impact of organized crimes in Nigeria is enormous. It affects the development of the country and discourages investment, particularly in the area of insecurity. Organized crime has eroded the people's confidence in the social order. On 21st of February 2012, the United Nations Security Council met to consider matters related to peace and security in Africa, focusing on the impact of transnational organized crime on peace, security, and stability in West Africa and the Sahel region. However, the persistent school of thought by succeeding governments in Nigeria is that there are no organized crime cartels in Nigeria as found in Europe, North or South America, but rather organized criminality. Thus, there is no concerted government effort to combat organized crime. Rather, there are efforts to combat individual criminality like money laundering and corruption among government officials. Several government agencies have been set up for this. Also, a specialized agency has been set up to deal with human trafficking. In Nigeria, certain interventions by way of legislative measures have been put in place against what we call organized criminality. These include Anti-Terrorism Act, Anti-Piracy, Money Laundering and Terrorism, Financial Prohibition Acts, etc. The legal texts are there, but we are not sure how effective they've been. Human trafficking shares a number of linkages with other organized criminal activities and is often a negative externality that facilitates other forms of organized crimes, not only as an end in itself, but as a means to an end. Human trafficking has a close relationship with environmental crimes, especially mineral resource crimes. Victims, especially child trafficked victims, are trafficked to mineral-rich areas and are engaged or forced to mine for little or nothing. Children are also trafficked into military and rebel groups and exploited as child soldiers. In this respect, the crimes of child soldier trafficking and small arms trafficking are closely interlinked and have both played major roles in regional conflicts over the years. Human smuggling has grown in predominance in a period when global migration has never been higher, but the institutional barriers to free labor migration and the capacity of the international humanitarian system to sustain significant refugee populations ensure that the smuggling industry has an important role to play. Criminal actors have profited significantly in recent years, with human smuggling into the EU alone estimated to be worth in the region of 6 billion euros per year in 2015. There's a bloodline between smuggled migration and human trafficking, with the two often overlapping, and the growing number of zones of fragility and protected refugee situations leave migrants vulnerable to abuses and trafficking. Nigeria is a source transit and destination country for girls, boys, and children subjected to trafficking, including forced labor and forced prostitution. Trafficked Nigerian women, men, and children are recruited from urban and rural areas within the country's borders. Women and girls for voluntary domestic servitude and involuntary sex exploitation, and boys for forced labor in street vending, domestic servitude, mining, and begging. According to the 2014 trafficking report in Nigeria, trafficking of young women from Nigeria to Europe for the purpose of sexual exploitation is one of the most lucrative and persistent trafficking flows, as it is very well organized. Nigeria is a party to the protocol to prevent, suppress, and punish trafficking in persons, especially women and children. The United Nations Convention Against Transnational Organized Crime, as well as a number of national human rights instruments. Nigeria has also ratified other international instruments which have provisions that can apply by extension to the protection of the human rights of trafficked persons. Human trafficking is endemic in Nigeria. As young women from Edo State, this is particularly a notorious fact, are trafficked into Italy for prostitution activities. Some of the trafficked victims are used to harvest human organs, and their parents are told that they died natural deaths. In 2003, Nigeria became the first African country to enact an anti-trafficking legislation with the Trafficking in Persons Prohibition Law Enforcement and Administrative Act 2003. It created the National Agency for the Prohibition of Trafficking in Persons. It was amended in March 2015. For instance, it ensures that the penalties for breaching the provisions of the law are consistent with the spirit of the trafficking protocols. The Act also increased the penalty for trafficking offenders and prescribed a minimum period of 5 years imprisonment and a minimum fine of 1 million naira for labor trafficking offenses. The law prescribes a minimum penalty of 5 years for sex trafficking offenses and a minimum fine of 1 million naira for the minimum penalty increases to 7 years imprisonment if the case involves a child. The new law prohibits all forms of trafficking, including trafficking for organ trade or ritual murders, which are common in our part of Africa. Section 8 of the Act, concerning the implementation of the agency's mandate, created specialized operational departments such as investigation and monitoring, counseling and rehabilitation, public enlightenment, legal and prosecution. In order to address every aspect of the human trafficking phenomenon, the agency adopted a 4-piece strategy. 1, prevention. The agency uses strategic tools such as conferences, workshops, and mass media campaigns, and promotes awareness within the population. It also conducts research on the root causes, magnitude, and patterns of human trafficking in the country. There's the aspect of protection. The agency is involved in activities with the aim of rehabilitating and integrating victims into society. In 2013, it developed a national referral mechanism for protection and assistance to trafficked persons in Nigeria, which provides formal guidelines for law enforcement, immigration officials, and service providers to improve protection and assistance to trafficked victims. The 2015 Act provides for treatment, protection, and non-discriminatory practices for victims. There is in place the National Policy on Protection and Assistance to Trafficked Persons, which was adopted in 2008 with the aim of increasing the protection and rehabilitation efforts. One of these goals is to improve, quote, appropriate and relevant services that will empower victims of trafficking in effective integration into their various communities. Prosecution. The NAPTIP, that is the name of the organization, is involved in the investigation of human trafficking cases, monitoring cross-border movements, and prosecutes trafficking cases in law courts. Nigeria was the first country in Africa to record successful anti-trafficking prosecutions, with 258 convictions between December 2004 and December 2014. In 2014 only, a total of 603 cases of human trafficking and other related matters were reported to the agency, which conducted 509 trafficking investigations, completed 56 prosecutions, and secured 30 convictions. In the first quarter of the year 2015, the agency received a number of 130 cases of human trafficking and other related matters. Partnership. The agency works in collaboration with other regional and international agencies or bodies that may ensure elimination and prevention of the root causes of the problem of trafficking in any person in Nigeria and in bordering countries. Nigeria has entered into various bilateral agreements of understanding with individual countries within Africa that have had a direct relationship with the problems of human trafficking, forced labor, and migration in general. In 2006, the African Union adopted the Ouagadougou Action Plan to combat trafficking in human beings, especially women and children, and Nigeria is a part of this action. There are heartbreaking stories of some of the survivors which have alerted the authorities on the new tricks and trends used by human traffickers. They have evolved new ways of luring and trafficking their victims. Intelligence reports indicate that these individuals have diversified their nefarious activities to include fabricating fake stories or providing educational support in form of scholarships, recruitment for sporting activities, and the most frightening being the organ harvesting. Judicial intervention. There is the proposal in the advanced stages of the setting up of a special court to adjudicate on certain categories of organized crimes like corruption, kidnapping, and human trafficking. Meanwhile, since 2013, there has been in place in all tiers of courts practice directions to the effect that corruption, human trafficking, and kidnapping cases should be expeditiously investigated, prosecuted by law enforcement, and swiftly determined by the court. Interlocutory appeals are discouraged in order to facilitate the swift determination of this genre of cases. There is thus a system in place to fast-track these cases through the courts. Also, all tiers of courts are to set aside a day in the week when only these types of cases are taken to ensure their swift determination. The International Association of Women Judges has been working since 2009 in various jurisdictions to educate our members on the jurisprudence relating to human trafficking. This has been of immense value to individual members of our various jurisdictions. Members are encouraged to have a victim-friendly court. Most traffic victims are lured because they hope for a better life. It is hoped that societies and communities will improve to reduce the temptation offered by the crime syndicates engaged in this crime. I'm grateful for this opportunity to learn about the interventions in other countries, particularly in the area of judicial intervention. As an administrator, there will be useful ideas for implementation in the country. Thank you very much.